My daughter hadn't answered my calls in a month. When I finally went to her house with my spare key, I heard a sound coming from the attic that made my blood run cold. What the rescue team found behind that locked door would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. 6 months. That's how long I'd been waking up alone in the king-sized bed Swithin and I had shared for 43 years. 6 months since the highway patrol knocked on my door with news that changed everything. 6 months since my husband's car went off Highway 85 in a storm, plunging into the canyon below. They searched for 2 weeks, found pieces of the car, twisted metal scattered across the ravine. But Swithin? Nothing. The river had been swollen from the rain, the current vicious. The officer who came to update me, a young man with kind eyes who couldn't look directly at me, said the body had likely been swept downstream, maybe miles away, maybe never to be found. After 3 months of waiting, of hoping against hope, the court declared him legally dead. That's what they do when there's no body. Presumed deceased. Such cold, bureaucratic words for the end of a life. This morning I stood in the garden Swithin had planted, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. October in Virginia meant the roses were in their last bloom, clinging to life before winter came. Swithin used to walk among them every morning, talking to them like they were old friends. "Looking good, ladies," he'd say, trimming a dead leaf here, adjusting a stake there. Now that was my job. I bent down to deadhead a wilted bloom, the pruning shears heavy in my hand. The repetitive motion was soothing. Clip, drop, move on. Clip, drop, move on. Here, among his roses, I could almost feel him beside me. Inside the house, though, the walls pressed in with silence so thick I could barely breathe. My only connection to the world outside this grief was my daughter, Selkie. But even that thread had worn thin, stretched to breaking. At first, right after the memorial service, we'd held one even without a body because people needed closure. Selkie called every day. "Mom, how are you holding up?" Her voice would be soft, concerned. We'd talk for an hour or more, sharing memories of Swithin, crying together over the phone. But gradually, the calls became shorter, less frequent. Her voice lost that softness, became clipped and businesslike. She stopped asking how I was feeling. Instead, she complained about her husband Paxton, about work, about money problems. Always money problems. And I listened. I nodded into the phone and transferred what I could from my pension account. She was struggling, I told myself. Young people today had it hard. The economy, student loans, all of it. She'd lost her father, too. Of course she was stressed. I justified every cold word, every missed call, every time she cut our conversation short because Paxton was calling her. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was. But grief does that. It wraps around you like a blanket, muffling everything else. The call that changed everything came a month ago, late on a Tuesday night. I'd already been in bed reading one of Swithin's favorite mystery novels. I'd been working my way through his collection, feeling closer to him with each page. The phone's ring shattered the quiet. "Mom?" Selkie's voice was breaking, hysterical. "Mom, I'm so sorry to call this late, but we need money, urgently, for surgery." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Surgery? Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I can't explain right now, we need it right away. Please, Mom, please." The fear in her voice bypassed every logical question in my brain. My daughter needed help. That was all that mattered. "How much?" I asked. The number she gave made me dizzy. $180,000. Nearly everything Swithin and I had saved over 40 years of marriage. Our retirement fund. Our safety net. Our rainy day money. Well, the rainy day had arrived. "I'll get it first thing in the morning," I told her. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew it all. The manager tried to warn me about scams, about staying safe, but I assured her this was for my daughter. Family. She processed the withdrawal, and I drove straight to Selkie's house in the suburbs, the envelope thick with cashier's checks sitting on my passenger seat. Selkie met me at the door. She looked terrible, pale, red-eyed, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She practically snatched the envelope from my hands, kissed my cheek so quickly I barely felt it, and mumbled something about rushing to the hospital. The door shut in my face before I could even ask which hospital. I stood on her porch for a full minute, staring at that closed door, feeling like an intruder, like I'd just completed a transaction rather than helping my child. But I pushed the feeling down. She was scared, I told myself, in crisis. Of course she wasn't thinking clearly. That was 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks of complete deafening silence. The first week, I didn't call. I didn't want to bother her during recovery. The second week, I started dialing her number. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I left messages. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. Just checking in. Call me when you can." No response. By the third week, I was calling twice a day. Finally, she sent a text. "Mom, everything's fine. We'll call back soon." She didn't. The fourth week, her phone was turned off entirely. Straight to voicemail, no rings. This morning, standing in Swithin's garden with my cold coffee, I made a decision. I couldn't sit here anymore, waiting for crumbs of contact from my own daughter. The knot of anxiety in my stomach had transformed into something else. Something colder. It was the same feeling I used to get in my old job, back before Selkie was born. I'd been a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Richmond. My specialty was finding discrepancies in financial records, the kind of discrepancies people worked very hard to hide. I'd look at a perfectly balanced ledger and know, deep in my gut, that something was wrong. The numbers would be right, but the story they told would be false. I felt that now. Everything about Selkie's emergency surgery story looked right on the surface. But underneath, something was rotten. I went inside, rinsed my coffee cup, and picked up my purse from the hook by the door. On the same hook hung a small keychain with a single brass key, the spare key to Selkie and Paxton's house. Swithin had insisted we keep it when they first bought the place. Well, when we put the down payment on the place for them. Just in case, he'd said. Just in case had arrived. I didn't call ahead. If something had happened to Selkie, Paxton would have contacted me. And if they'd just taken my life savings and disappeared on some vacation, well, I'd find out soon enough. The drive took 30 minutes through increasingly suburban neighborhoods, where every house looked like it had been stamped from the same mold. Selkie and Paxton's place was a 2-story colonial with pale blue siding, black shutters, and a perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of house that screams successful young couple. Paxton's car, a sleek Audi he'd bought last year, sat in the driveway. So at least he was home. I rang the doorbell, waited, rang again, nothing. I knocked, the sound hollow against the wooden door. Still nothing. That cold feeling in my stomach intensified. I took out the spare key. It slid into the lock smoothly, and the deadbolt clicked open. The house was silent. Not quiet, silent. There's a difference. Quiet is peaceful, restful. Silence is the absence of life. I stepped inside. "Selkie?" My voice echoed in the entryway. "Paxton?" No answer. The air felt stale, like a hotel room that had been closed up for weeks. I moved through the foyer into the living room. Everything was clean, almost too clean. Not a speck of dust anywhere, which struck me as odd. On the coffee table sat a crystal vase with flowers that had died weeks ago, their petals brown and crispy, water long evaporated. Who keeps dead flowers but dusts around them? I walked into the kitchen. More unsettling perfection. Not a single dish in the sink. Counters wiped spotless. I opened the refrigerator, and my unease deepened. Nearly empty. A bottle of water, some condiment bottles, a container of Greek yogurt with an expiration date from 2 weeks ago. Where were they? And more importantly, if they were gone, who was keeping this house so meticulously clean? I moved back to the hallway, intending to check upstairs. Maybe Selkie was sleeping off surgery complications. Maybe she couldn't hear me from the bedroom. But then I heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I froze, my hand on the banister. The sound came again. Rhythmic, desperate. Not the scrabbling of mice or squirrels. This was deliberate, methodical. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from above, from the attic. My heart began to pound, each beat echoing in my ears. I forced myself to climb the stairs, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. At the second-floor landing, a small door led to the attic space. I'd been up there once, years ago, when they first moved in. It was unfinished, used for storage. The scratching got louder as I approached. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. There was a bolt on the door. A heavy industrial barn bolt, the kind you'd use on a shed or garage. Brand new, the metal still shiny, completely out of place on the white-painted door. It was locked from the outside. My brain struggled to make sense of it. Why would anyone bolt an attic door from the outside? What could possibly be up there that needed to be locked in? The scratching stopped, then started again, more frantic this time, as if whatever was making the sound had heard my footsteps. I stumbled backward, pulling my phone from my purse with shaking hands. My mind went to dark places. Someone hiding up there, someone dangerous, some awful secret Paxton and Selkie were keeping. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't call Paxton. I dialed 911. Emergency services, what's your emergency? I'm at my daughter's house. My voice came out as a whisper. There's something in the attic. The door is bolted from the outside. Someone's up there. I gave them the address. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, her voice calm and professional, telling me to go outside and wait. But I couldn't move. I stood in that hallway, phone pressed to my ear, listening to that desperate scratching and knowing, somehow, that my life was about to break open in ways I couldn't imagine. The fire truck arrived first, sirens cutting through the suburban quiet. 2 firefighters in full gear came through the door I'd left open, their heavy boots thudding on the hardwood floors. Ma'am, I'm Captain Rodriguez. You called about someone in the attic? I pointed up the stairs, unable to speak. They exchanged a glance when they saw the bolt. Captain Rodriguez's jaw tightened. His partner, a younger man whose name tag read Morrison, took out a crowbar. Step back, please. The first blow echoed through the house. The second splintered wood. The bolt held firm. Morrison set his shoulder against the door and heaved. Wood cracked. The door flew open, taking part of the frame with it. The smell hit me first. Unwashed human, sickness, desperation. The kind of smell that tells you immediately that something is terribly, horribly wrong. Morrison shone his flashlight into the darkness. The beam swept across boxes, old furniture, dust motes dancing in the light. Then it landed on the far corner, on a person, or what was left of one. Time did something strange then. It slowed down and sped up simultaneously. I saw everything in crystalline detail. The skeletal figure dressed in rags that might have once been pajamas, the chain running from an ankle to the heating pipe, the gray, papery skin stretched over bones, the matted hair and beard, while also feeling like I was watching it happen to someone else, from very far away. Captain Rodriguez swore under his breath. Morrison turned pale and took a step back, and then the figure moved. Slowly, with what must have been superhuman effort, the person in the corner turned their head toward the light. Sunken eyes and a skull-like face. A mouth that opened but made no sound at first. Then a whisper so soft I almost didn't hear it. Iseult? The world stopped, because I knew that voice. I'd heard it every day for 43 years. I'd heard it say I love you, and what's for dinner, and come look at the roses, they're beautiful this year. I'd heard it in my dreams every night for the past 6 months, ever since the highway patrol told me my husband had driven off a cliff and drowned in the river below. Swithin. His name came out of me like a prayer, like a curse, like something that couldn't possibly be real but was happening anyway. Captain Rodriguez was on his radio, calling for an ambulance, using words like critical condition and possible kidnapping and malnutrition. Morrison came back down the stairs and tried to guide me away, but I couldn't move. I could only stare at the man in the attic who had my husband's voice, my husband's eyes, Swithin's eyes, unmistakable even in that ruined face. The man I'd buried 6 months ago. Except I hadn't buried him, had I? There'd been no body, just an empty casket at the memorial service, filled with his favorite things, his watch, his reading glasses, a photograph from our wedding day. Ma'am, Morrison was saying, ma'am, we need to get him out. Can you step back? I moved like a sleepwalker, backing into the hallway as they brought out a stretcher. They were so gentle with him, this broken thing that used to be my husband, lifting him carefully, supporting his head. He didn't weigh anything. That's what I remember thinking. He should be heavy. Swithin was a big man, 6'2", broad-shouldered, but they lifted him like he was made of paper. I followed them down the stairs, out to the ambulance, never taking my eyes off him. The paramedics were already working, inserting an IV, wrapping him in thermal blankets, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Ma'am, are you family?" one of them asked. "I'm his wife." The words felt surreal. I'd been his widow. Now I was his wife again. But the man on the stretcher barely looked human, let alone like my Swithin. They let me ride in the ambulance. I sat on the small bench seat, holding onto the rail as the vehicle swayed through turns, sirens wailing. I watched Swithin's chest rise and fall under the silver blanket. Such a simple thing, breathing, but it meant everything. He was alive. My husband was alive. And my daughter, I couldn't finish the thought. Couldn't let my brain go where it was trying to go. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. But the bolt on the attic door had been new, shiny, recently installed. And Selkie and Paxton's house had been empty, but meticulously clean. And my daughter hadn't answered my calls in a month. The cold knot in my stomach wasn't anxiety anymore. It was certainty. The same certainty I used to feel when I'd found the hidden discrepancy in a ledger, the one number that proved everything else was a lie. I looked down at Swithin's wasted hand, the IV needle taped to translucent skin, and felt something inside me transform. The grief I'd carried like a heavy shawl for 6 months burned away in an instant, leaving behind something harder, colder, clarity. My daughter had done this. I didn't know how yet or why, but I knew. The same way I knew the sun would rise tomorrow and that my life would never, ever be the same. The ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, and they rushed Swithin inside. I followed, no longer the grief-stricken widow who'd been tending roses that morning. I was something else now. I was a woman with a job to do. They kept Swithin in the ICU for 3 days. 3 days of machines beeping, of nurses coming and going with worried expressions, of doctors speaking in hushed tones just outside his room. 3 days of me sitting in that uncomfortable chair, watching the slow drip of nutrients into his veins, watching his chest rise and fall. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of returning to our empty house, to his roses, to the life I'd been living based on a lie, I couldn't face it. The hospital cafeteria sold terrible coffee and stale sandwiches, and I lived on both. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, his eyes opened. Really opened, not the half-conscious fluttering of the previous days. He turned his head on the pillow, slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds, and looked directly at me. "Iseult." His voice was a rasp, barely audible over the beep of the heart monitor. "You found me." I stood up, moved closer to the bed, and took his hand. It felt like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. "Don't talk," I said. "Save your strength." But he shook his head, the movement clearly painful. Need to tell you. Later, when you're stronger. Now." His fingers tightened on mine with surprising strength. "Before they come back. They, my daughter and her husband." My body went cold. "Tell me," I said. The story came out in fragments, in whispered sentences between labored breaths. I had to lean close to hear him, my ear near his mouth, and with each word he spoke, the person I'd been that morning in the garden died a little more. 9 months ago, Paxton had invited him on a fishing trip. Father-son bonding, he'd called it. A weekend at a cabin by Lake Anna, just the two of them. Swithin had been touched. Paxton had never been particularly warm to him, but this felt like an olive branch. They'd driven up on a Friday afternoon. The cabin was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for fishing, Paxton had said. That night, Paxton offered him a beer. Just one beer, watching the sunset from the dock. Swithin remembered taking a sip, remembered the world starting to tilt, remembered Paxton's face, blurry and strange, saying something about how this was nothing personal, just business. He woke up in the attic, chained to the heating pipe. How long was I there before... I couldn't finish the question. Before the accident? Swithin's laugh was bitter, barely a breath. There was no accident, Iseult. Paxton staged the whole thing. He took my car, drove it up to Highway 85 in a storm, and pushed it off the cliff. I don't know how he got back. Maybe Selkie followed in another car. Maybe he called an Uber. Does it matter? No, it didn't matter. What mattered was that my daughter had known, had helped. They came to see me, Swithin continued. That first week, both of them, told me about their plan. They needed the insurance money, needed my pension. They'd been living beyond their means for years, apparently. Credit card debt. Paxton's failed business ventures. They were drowning, and we were their life raft. They could have asked. We would have helped, he finished. I know, but that wasn't enough. They wanted everything, and they wanted us out of the way. Us? He looked at me, and in his sunken eyes I saw something that made my blood freeze. Iseult, they weren't going to stop with me. Check your mail. Check your bank accounts. I heard them talking about you, about how much longer you'd last, about what they'd do with your apartment. The reverse mortgage application, the forged power of attorney. It all clicked into place. The first 2 months they fed me, Swithin said. Barely. Enough to keep me alive while they processed the insurance paperwork, filed the death certificate, made sure everything looked legitimate. Selkie would bring food up once every few days. She wouldn't look at me. Just set the plate down and leave. His voice broke. I tried talking to her. I said, baby girl, what are you doing? This isn't you. We can fix whatever's wrong. But she'd just shake her head and walk out. Like I wasn't her father anymore. Like I was just an obstacle. I felt tears on my face but didn't wipe them away. Couldn't move. After they got the insurance money, the food stopped. They'd bring water every 2 or 3 days. Just enough. I tried rationing it, tried to make it last, but... He gestured weakly at himself, at the skeletal frame under the hospital blankets. I scratched at that door every day, every single day. I thought maybe a neighbor would hear, maybe a delivery person, anyone. I heard you, I whispered, when I came to check on Selkie. She told me about the money she took from you, the surgery that never happened. She was bragging about it, about how easy you were to manipulate, how you'd given her everything without question. His fingers tightened on mine again. That's when I knew I had to survive, had to live long enough for you to realize what was happening, because they were going to take everything from you, and then they were going to get rid of you too. I sat back in the chair, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with awful clarity. The emergency surgery, the desperate phone call, the $180,000 that disappeared into their accounts. It wasn't just theft, it was the second phase of their plan. When did you last see them? I asked. Maybe 3 weeks ago? Time got strange. Paxton came up, said they were going on vacation. He was laughing, said they'd earned it. That's when the water stopped coming regularly. That's when I knew. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. That's when he knew they'd decided he'd lasted long enough, that they were just waiting for him to die. A nurse came in then, checked his vitals, gave me a sympathetic look. He needs to rest, Mrs. Marwick. This is a lot of stress on his system. I nodded and stood up, but before I left, I leaned down close to Swithin's ear. I will handle this, I said. Trust me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw a spark of the man I'd married. I do trust you, he said. I always have. That's why I kept scratching that door. I knew you'd come. I left the hospital as the sun was setting, painting the Virginia sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful and terrible. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My daughter had tried to murder her father, was trying to destroy me, had taken everything and wanted more. The grief I'd felt at Swithin's death was nothing compared to this, because I'd lost my daughter too. Not to death, but to something worse. To greed. To coldness. To a kind of evil I hadn't believed she was capable of. But sitting in that parking lot, feeling sorry for myself, wasn't going to fix anything. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Tobias Freeman. Tobias was the son of my best friend from college, Althea Freeman. Althea had died 5 years ago from breast cancer, but before she passed, she'd made me promise to stay in touch with her boy. He thinks of you as family, she'd said. Don't let him forget that. I'd kept that promise. Tobias and I had lunch every few months, and I'd watched him grow from a grieving son into one of Richmond's most respected attorneys. He specialized in financial fraud cases, white-collar crime, the kind of work that required both legal expertise and forensic accounting skills. Exactly what I needed. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Mrs. Marwick, is everything okay? No, Tobias. Everything is very much not okay. I need your help, urgently. Of course, what's happened? I took a deep breath. My husband is alive. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "I'm sorry, what?" "Swithin is alive. He's in the hospital right now. And Selkie—" My voice caught on my daughter's name. "Selkie and Paxton tried to kill him. They faked his death, collected the insurance money, and have been systematically stealing from us. And they're not done." "Jesus Christ!" I heard movement on his end, the sound of a door closing. "Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm safe, but I need you to do some things for me, and I need you to do them without asking too many questions right now. Can you do that?" "Absolutely. Tell me what you need." I'd been thinking about this since Swithin told me his story. I'd been thinking like the forensic accountant I used to be, the one who could look at a complex fraud and know exactly how to unravel it. "First, freeze all joint accounts that Swithin and I hold. Everything. Checking, savings, investment accounts. I'll email you the account numbers and passwords tonight. Consider it done. What else? Second, I need you to start the process of getting me full power of attorney over Swithin's affairs. He's incapacitated right now. I'll need access to everything. His pension accounts, insurance policies, all of it. That'll take some time, but with a medical evaluation we can expedite it. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. Third, and this is critical, Tobias, nobody can know you're doing this, especially not Selkie and Paxton. To them, I need to appear exactly as I have for the past 6 months, a grieving, confused old woman who doesn't understand how the world works. Can you manage that?" "I can." His voice had taken on a sharp, focused quality. "Mrs. Marwick, do you want to tell me what's really going on here?" "Soon, but first I need to build a case. A real case, the kind that will hold up in court. And for that, I need somewhere to work, somewhere private. I have a small office in another building. I use it for sensitive cases. It's not my main office, so there's no chance of running into anyone you know. It has a computer, a printer, a locking file cabinet. Will that work?" "Perfectly. I'll have keys made tonight. Miss Marwick." He hesitated. "My mother told me once that you saved her during her divorce, that you found money her ex-husband had hidden, money that meant she could keep the house and put me through college. She said you had a gift for seeing patterns other people missed. That was a long time ago, Tobias. Maybe, but gifts like that don't disappear. They just wait for when they're needed most." He paused. "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. All the way." I felt something loosen in my chest, some tightness I hadn't realized was there. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's destroy them first." The next morning I called the hospital. Swithin was stable, sleeping comfortably. The doctor said his condition was improving slowly. It would be a long recovery, but he was going to live. That was all I needed to hear. I drove to the address Tobias had given me, a nondescript office building in downtown Richmond. 4th floor, suite 412. The key he'd left with the building's reception desk opened a small, windowless room that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. A desk, 2 chairs, a desktop computer, and a printer. Everything I needed. Tobias had left a note on the desk. "Documents requested from banks will arrive this afternoon via courier. Call if you need anything." I sat down at the desk, and something strange happened. My hands, which had been shaking since I'd heard that scratching in the attic, steadied. My mind, clouded with emotion and shock, cleared. I felt the old circuits in my brain light up, pathways I hadn't used in 40 years coming back to life. Forensic accountant Iseult Marwick was back on the job. The courier arrived at 2 p.m. with a thick manila envelope. Inside were bank statements, transaction histories, account summaries, everything Tobias had been able to request overnight. I spread them across the desk and started reading. At first, everything looked normal. Pension deposits, utility payments, grocery store charges, the mundane financial life of a retired couple. But I knew how to look deeper, how to see the story the numbers were trying to hide. I started with the 6 months before Swithin's accident. That's when I found the first anomaly, large cash withdrawals. $15,000 here, $20,000 there, all from our joint checking account, all labeled in the memo line as home repair or medical expenses. I pulled out my phone and checked my email, scrolling back to messages from Selkie during that time. No mention of home repairs, no mention of medical problems. So where had the money gone? Next, I found regular transfers to an account in Paxton's name, $5,000 a month, like clockwork. The memo line said loan repayment. What loan? Swithin had never mentioned loaning them money. I kept digging. Found the police report from Swithin's accident. Read it 3 times. Something bothered me about it, and finally I realized what it was: the location. Highway 85 was nowhere near the route Swithin would take to or from anywhere he regularly went. What reason would he have to be driving there during a storm? I called the county sheriff's office, claiming to be following up on my husband's case. The deputy I spoke to was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. "We searched as thoroughly as we could, ma'am, but the conditions were difficult. The river was running fast. We did our best." "How long did you search?" 2 days in the immediate area. After that, we expanded downstream, but 2 days. They'd searched for 2 days and then given up, and Paxton had been the one pushing for the declaration of death, filing paperwork, hurrying the process along. I turned to the insurance documents next. The policy was for $2.5 million, a policy Swithin had taken out through his company when he retired. I was named as co-beneficiary originally, but my hand froze on the paper. 6 months before the accident, the beneficiary had been changed. Now it listed only Selke, 100% to Selke. I found the change form, examined the signature. It was Swithin's signature, but something was off about it. The pressure was wrong, the flow interrupted. Like someone had traced it rather than written it naturally. A forgery, not a good one either, but good enough to fool an insurance company that wanted to pay out and move on. The payout had been made 5 months ago, $2.5 million, deposited directly into Selke's account. I sat back, feeling sick. That was what the Maldives vacation had been funded with, what Paxton's new Audi cost, what paid for my daughter's designer clothes I'd seen in her social media photos. But they hadn't stopped there. I found statements for Swithin's pension account. After his death, someone had been making withdrawals. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Then larger. The signatures on these withdrawal authorizations were supposedly Swithin's, but I knew my husband's handwriting. These were forgeries, too. Over 6 months, they'd drained another $450,000 from his retirement account. And then I found the document that made my blood run cold. It was at the bottom of the stack, like someone had tried to hide it. An application for a reverse mortgage on my apartment. The apartment Swithin and I had bought 30 years ago. That was nearly paid off. That was my home. The application was in my name. Attached to it was a power of attorney, supposedly signed by me, giving Paxton Pike full authority to manage my financial affairs due to cognitive decline and diminished capacity following spouse's death. I stared at my forged signature. They'd done it while I was grieving, while I was distracted and vulnerable, while I was being the good mother, trusting my daughter, giving her money without question. The application was dated 3 weeks ago. Status under review. I understood then, understood the full scope of their plan. Phase 1, fake Swithin's death. Collect insurance. Empty his accounts. Phase 2, manipulate me into giving them my savings. The fake emergency surgery had accomplished that beautifully. Phase 3, take my home through the reverse mortgage, using the forged power of attorney to declare me incompetent. Phase 4, once I was broke and homeless, I'd be easy to dispose of. A nursing home, maybe. Somewhere I could be declared mentally unfit, where no one would listen if I said my husband was alive. My daughter had betrayed me. They were going to erase us both, wipe us out of existence and live off our money. I gathered all the documents into neat stacks, organizing them by type and date. Each piece of paper was evidence. Each forged signature was a nail in their coffin. The woman who'd been crying in the garden over dead roses was gone. In her place was something harder, colder, more dangerous. I called Tobias. "I have everything I need. Can you contact the police? I want to file a formal complaint, but I need it handled carefully." "I know just the detective, Sarah Morrison. She's tough and she's thorough. I'll reach out to her tonight." "Good. And Tobias, keep monitoring Selke and Paxton's credit cards. I need to know where they are." "Already on it. They're currently using their cards in the Maldives, Four Seasons Resort. They checked in 3 days ago." 3 days. The same time Swithin had woken up. They were on a tropical vacation, drinking cocktails and soaking up the sun, while their father fought for his life in a hospital ICU. "Perfect," I said. "Let them enjoy it. It's going to be their last vacation for a very long time." I didn't have to wait long. The call came 2 days later, just as I was leaving the hospital after visiting Swithin. My phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Baby Girl, the nickname I'd given her as an infant. The nickname that used to fill me with warmth. Now it just felt like a lie, like everything else. I let it ring twice more, composing myself, getting into character. Then I answered, making my voice weak and confused. Hello, Selkie? Hey, Mom. Her voice was bright, cheerful, loud. In the background, I could hear the sound of water splashing and distant music. How are you doing? How was I doing? My husband was alive in a hospital bed after being tortured for months by his own daughter, and she wanted to know how I was doing? Oh, you know, I said, letting my voice quaver. Getting by. Where are you, sweetheart? It sounds so noisy. Paxton and I decided to take a little vacation. We both needed to decompress, you know? Get some fresh air. Fresh air, while Swithin had been breathing stale attic air, begging for water. That's nice, dear. You deserve a break. Mom, listen. Paxton's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. There's a problem. I tried to pay for lunch and the card was declined. Selkie's too. Something's wrong with the bank. Here we go, I thought. The trap is sprung. Oh my, I said, injecting maximum confusion into my voice. Oh dear, I don't understand these things. It's your main account, Selkie said, and I could hear the edge in her voice now, the hint of demand under the sweet tone. Daddy's account. Maybe there's some kind of audit or something. Can you call them? Tell them everything's fine? Daddy's account. The account belonging to the man she'd chained in an attic. Well, sweetheart, maybe it's that, what do you call it? Fraud alert? The bank told me once that if there are unusual charges from overseas, they might block the card. For security. See? Selkie's voice brightened. So just call them. Confirm it's us. Tell them everything's fine. I'll try, but honey, I'm not home right now, and my eyes haven't been good. Looking for all those documents. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow? Paxton exploded. We have nothing to pay for dinner with tonight. Mrs. Marwick, just pick up the phone and call. It takes 5 minutes. I let the silence stretch, let them hear the hurt in it. Don't yell at me, please, I said softly. My blood pressure, I can barely manage as it is after everything. The guilt trip worked. Paxton went quiet. Selkie's voice came back, sickeningly sweet. We're sorry, Mom. We didn't mean to upset you. We're just worried, you know? You'll try to call them, right? I'll try, baby. I promise. We'll call you back in a few hours, okay? Okay. I ended the call and sat in my car, staring at the phone. They hadn't asked how I was, hadn't asked if I needed anything, hadn't expressed concern about me living alone, grieving, managing on my own. They only cared about the money. I didn't call them back that afternoon. Or that evening. The next morning, my phone started ringing again. I didn't answer. They called 5 more times. I ignored them all. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed with text messages. Mom, please call back. We need you to fix this. Mom, answer your phone. This isn't funny. Call us now. The desperation was palpable. I could picture them in their resort paradise, watching their perfect vacation crumble as their funds disappeared. The inconvenience would turn to anxiety, the anxiety to anger. And then they'd come home. They'd drop everything and rush back to deal with the confused old woman who was causing problems. They'd come to intimidate me, to take control, to fix their broken money pipeline. They'd fly right into the trap. I called Tobias. They've taken the bait. How long until they can get back from the Maldives? Flights are limited from there. Best case, they're looking at 36 hours of travel, maybe more. Perfect. That gives us time to get everything in place. Can Detective Morrison meet with us tomorrow? Already scheduled. 10 a.m. at my office. I looked at my phone, at the stream of increasingly frantic messages from my daughter. Good, I said. Let's make sure we're ready for them. I had one more call to make. I dialed the hospital, asked for Swithin's room. Iseult? His voice was stronger today, clearer. Is everything okay? Everything is going to be okay, I told him. They're coming home, and when they get here, we're going to end this. I could hear the smile in his voice. That's my girl. Get some rest, I said. You're going to need your strength. In a few days, you're going to have to face your daughter in court, and you're going to have to tell the world what she did to you." "I'm ready," he said. "I've been ready since the day they locked me in that attic." I hung up and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one who'd been watering roses and mourning her husband a week ago. This woman was harder, colder. This woman had remembered who she used to be, before marriage and motherhood had softened her edges. This woman was dangerous, and my daughter had no idea what was waiting for her. 38 hours after my last conversation with Selkie, Tobias sent me a text. They just landed at Dulles, credit card charged for airport parking, estimate 45 minutes to their house. I was ready. Detective Sarah Morrison had visited me the day before. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing in a no-nonsense manner I appreciated. I'd shown her everything: the bank statements, the forged signatures, the insurance payout, the reverse mortgage application. She'd listened to Swithin's preliminary statement at the hospital, recorded with a lawyer present. "This is one of the most calculated cases I've seen," she'd said, shaking her head. "Most family fraud is opportunistic, sloppy. This was planned. Can you arrest them? With what you've given me? Absolutely. We have attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft. The question is when and where you want this to happen." I'd thought about it, about surprising them at the airport, at their house, dragging them away in handcuffs in front of their neighbors, but that felt too easy, too impersonal. "I want them to come to me," I'd said. "I want them to walk into my apartment thinking they're in control, and I want to be there when they realize they're not." Detective Morrison had smiled, a cold smile that reminded me of myself. "I like the way you think, Mrs. Marwick." Now I sat at my kitchen table, waiting. I'd left my apartment door unlocked, set out my good teapot, the one Swithin had brought back from a business trip to England 30 years ago, poured myself a cup of tea and added a slice of lemon. Detective Morrison sat to my right, her partner, Detective James Hayes, to my left. Both in plain clothes, both still and watchful. Tobias sat at the end of the table, a thick folder in front of him, his lawyer's face unreadable. We didn't have to wait long. I heard them on the stairs first. Heavy footsteps, angry footsteps, the sound of someone who'd been traveling for 2 days and was beyond exhausted, beyond patient. The door slammed open. Selkie and Paxton stood in the doorway, breathing hard. They looked terrible. Paxton's expensive vacation clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed. Selkie's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and pinched. They saw me first, sitting calmly at my kitchen table. Then they saw the others. They froze. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old anniversary clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock, counting down their final seconds of freedom. Selkie recovered first. She'd always been good at acting, even as a child. She could cry on command, smile through anything. Now she stepped forward, and tears began streaming down her face. "Mom?" Her voice broke beautifully. "Mom, what's going on? What have you done?" She moved toward the table, but stopped as if she'd hit an invisible wall. The tears were real, tears of fear, of rage, of desperation, but not remorse, never remorse. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she continued, voice rising. "We just started to get our lives back together after Daddy died. It's been so hard, Mom, so hard. And you set the police on us? For what? For trying to survive?" It was a masterful performance. She spoke of sleepless nights, of depression, of how much she missed her father. She said I'd betrayed her, stabbed her in the back when she needed me most. The words poured out in a stream of accusations and pain. I let her talk, let her empty her arsenal. The detectives remained silent, watching with professional detachment. Tobias didn't move. When she finally ran out of words, when her breathing was ragged and her face was flushed, silence filled the kitchen again, heavy and damning. She waited for me to break, to cry, to apologize, to be the mother who always gave in, always forgave. I took a sip of my tea, set the cup down carefully in its saucer. The clink of china seemed loud in the quiet. Then I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, with eyes that saw clearly for the first time in years. "I was at your house, Selkie." 5 simple words, but they hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I let the silence stretch, let those words sink deep into her consciousness like stones into water. Then I delivered the killing blow. "Your father is asking to see you." Selkie's face turned to stone. Her eyes, still wet with fake tears, went wide with something beyond fear. Horror. The horror of someone whose perfectly constructed lie has just shattered into a million pieces. She turned to Paxton, looking for help, for guidance, for someone to tell her this wasn't happening. But Paxton was already moving. He stepped forward, pushing Selkie behind him, his face hardening into something calculating and cold. This was a man used to talking his way out of problems, used to being the smartest person in the room. "So you found him," he said. Not a question, a statement. He was taking control of the narrative, or trying to. "Well, that actually simplifies things. But Mom," he turned to address Detective Morrison and Hayes. "Mrs. Marwick, I mean, she doesn't have the full picture." His voice took on a tone of concern, of reasonableness, the voice of someone explaining a difficult situation to people who didn't understand. "About a year ago, Mr. Marwick had a massive stroke. We didn't want to tell you." He glanced at me with fake sympathy. "Because you were already so fragile. We were trying to protect you." I watched him spin his lie with something close to admiration. He was good. Very good. After the stroke, Swithin changed. He became aggressive, violent. He attacked Selkie twice, tried to hurt me. The doctor said it was dementia, that it would only get worse. We couldn't... His voice caught perfectly. We couldn't put him in some facility where strangers would restrain him, drug him. He was family. Selkie had started nodding along, playing her part. Quiet sobs, face buried in her hands. We tried to care for him at home, but his condition deteriorated. He started having episodes where he didn't recognize us, where he became dangerous to himself and others. The attic, he sighed heavily. That was a last resort. We set up a comfortable room up there, brought him food, water, medications. But he refused to eat, threw plates at us. We had to lock the door for everyone's safety. He turned fully to face the detectives now, his voice earnest and pained. We were trying to protect Mrs. Marwick from seeing her husband like that, from being hurt by him. Everything we did out of love. And now, he gestured at me, I can see that the stress, the grief, it's affected her too. Her memory isn't what it was. She doesn't remember Swithin's violent episodes. She's confused, and I believe this gentleman, he nodded at Tobias, is taking advantage of an elderly woman in a vulnerable state, probably hoping to get access to her finances. The lie was complete, perfect, flawless in its evil. He was trying to flip the script entirely. Make Swithin the problem. Make me the victim of my own dementia. Make Tobias the villain. Paint himself and Selkie as devoted children making impossible choices. And in the silence that followed, I could see him starting to believe he'd won. That his words had created enough reasonable doubt, enough confusion, that he'd walk away from this. Detective Morrison let the silence stretch. Then she reached for the folder on the table in front of her. Slowly, deliberately. She opened it with careful movements and slid it across the table toward Paxton. "Familiarize yourself with these, please," she said. Her voice was completely flat, emotionless. Paxton picked up the first document. I watched his face as he read. It was the medical report from the hospital. Several pages of detailed findings from the team that had examined Swithin. No mention of a stroke. No mention of dementia. Instead, clinical descriptions of systematic starvation, of muscle atrophy consistent with prolonged immobilization, of dehydration so severe it had nearly caused kidney failure. And at the bottom, in the attending physician's clear handwriting, patient is fully conscious and oriented. Speech is coherent and lucid. Cognitive functions are normal. Memory is intact. Patient has provided detailed account of captivity and abuse. The confidence started sliding off Paxton's face like wax melting. Detective Morrison turned to the next page. My work, the spreadsheet I'd created, showing every transaction, every withdrawal, every forged signature. Next to each major expense, I'd noted in red ink what it had been used for. Maldives vacation, $45,000. Audi Q7, $62,000. Cartier jewelry, $28,000. Designer furniture, $35,000. Their luxury purchases, laid out like an indictment. Because that's exactly what it was. Selkie had gone completely still, staring at the documents like they were a snake about to strike. The next page was the fake death certificate, alongside the official response from the county coroner's office, confirming that Swithin Marwick had never been brought to their facility, that the doctor whose signature appeared on the certificate had been terminated 2 years before the date on the document. Then came the insurance payout records. $2.5 million, paid to Selkie Marwick based on fraudulent documentation. And finally, the reverse mortgage application, the forged power of attorney, the handwriting analysis showing that both my signature and Swithin's were crude forgeries. Detective Morrison closed the folder. "Your father has made a full statement," she said quietly. "He remembers everything, the drugging, the staging of the accident, the 9 months in the attic, the conversations you had with him about why you were doing this, the day you told him you were going on vacation and he wouldn't be seeing you again." Paxton's hands were shaking now. Selkie had gone gray. "He also remembers," Morrison continued, "the day you told him that once Mrs. Marwick's money was gone, once you'd taken her apartment, you planned to have her declared incompetent and placed in a facility. His words were, 'They were going to erase us both and live off our money like we'd never existed.'" Detective Morrison stood. Hayes stood with her. They moved with the practiced coordination of partners who'd done this many times before. "Paxton Marcus Pike, Selkie Denise Marwick." Morrison's voice was formal now, official. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, forgery of legal documents, identity theft, and elder abuse." She read them their Miranda rights as Hayes pulled out handcuffs. The metallic click as they closed around Paxton's wrists seemed impossibly loud in my small kitchen. Paxton said nothing. His face had gone blank, shut down. Already thinking about lawyers, about defense strategies, about how to minimize the damage. But Selkie turned to look at me as Hayes cuffed her hands behind her back. There was no remorse in her eyes, no shame, just bewilderment, confusion. Like a child caught stealing candy, unable to understand why the punishment was so severe. She opened her mouth, and for a moment I thought she might apologize, might finally show some hint of the daughter I'd raised. "Mom," she said, "I don't understand. Why are you doing this to me? Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong. Just confusion that I dared to fight back. And in that moment, whatever tiny piece of hope I'd been clinging to died completely." "Because what you did to your father," I said quietly, "was unforgivable. And what you planned to do to me, that was even worse." Hayes led them toward the door. Selkie was crying now, real tears, but they were tears of self-pity, of anger at being caught. At the doorway, she turned back one more time. "You're my mother. You're supposed to love me no matter what. You're supposed to forgive me." I met her eyes. "I was your mother," I said. "You killed her the day you locked your father in that attic. Everything after that was just paperwork." The door closed behind them. The sound of their footsteps faded down the stairs. A car door slammed. An engine started. And then silence. I sat at my kitchen table, the tea cold in my cup, and felt absolutely nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief, just a vast, echoing emptiness where my daughter used to be. Tobias touched my shoulder gently. "It's over, Mrs. Marwick. You won." Had I? I'd saved Swithin's life, saved my own future, put 2 criminals in prison where they belonged. But I'd lost my daughter, my only child. That didn't feel like winning. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Swithin testified from a wheelchair, still weak but clear-minded and determined. He looked at Selkie only once during his testimony, when the prosecutor asked him to identify his attackers. His voice didn't waver. I didn't attend every day. I couldn't. But I was there for the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Paxton got 30 years, no possibility of parole for 15. Selkie got 25, no parole for 12. She tried to look at me as they led her away in handcuffs. I looked straight ahead. That was 9 months ago. 9 months, long enough to carry and birth new life, or to bury an old life and begin another. Today was the first day in all those months that I felt like I could finally breathe. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. I'd sold the old one, couldn't bear to stay there with all its memories, and looked out over Richmond. The city hummed below me, alive and indifferent to my small drama. Cars flowed along the streets. People hurried to work. Life went on. My apartment was small but bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines. No ghosts here. No weight of the past pressing down. On the table beside me sat my tablet. Open on the screen was a textbook. Modern Forensic Accounting, Digital Age Methods and Analysis. I'd enrolled in online courses 3 months ago, decided to reinstate my CPA license. The world had changed since I'd last practiced, but the fundamentals remained the same. Find the pattern. Follow the money. Uncover the truth. My brain, dormant for so long, had come alive again. I was good at this. Had always been good at it. I didn't know yet if I'd take on clients. Maybe do some consulting work. Maybe just study for myself, proving that at 68, I could still learn, still grow, still be more than just someone's wife or mother. My phone buzzed. A text from the rehabilitation center. Swithin is asking if you're coming by today. He says to tell you the cafeteria has your favorite pie. I smiled. Swithin was recovering slowly. He'd never be the man he was before. The physical damage was too severe, the psychological scars too deep. He still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden sounds, but he was alive. We were both alive. I texted back, "Tell him I'll be there in an hour." We'd talked about what came next, whether we'd live together again or if too much had changed, whether we could rebuild what we'd had or if we needed to build something entirely new. We didn't have answers yet, but we had time. I thought about Selkie sometimes, wondered if she understood yet what she'd done, if she lay awake in her cell and felt remorse, or if she still believed she was the victim in all this. I'd received 3 letters from her in the past 9 months. I'd burned all 3 without opening them. Some people might call that cruel, unforgiving, but I'd learned something in that attic, something in those days of investigation and waiting. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. Love isn't unconditional. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away. My daughter had made her choices. Now she was living with them. And I was making mine. I took a sip of my coffee. Good coffee, freshly ground, none of the instant stuff I used to drink, and went back to my textbook. There was a complex case study about cryptocurrency fraud that I was working through. It was challenging, fascinating. The sun warmed my face. The city made its noise below. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something like peace. Not happiness exactly. The wounds were too fresh for that, but something quieter, deeper. The sense that I had survived, that I had fought back, that I had reclaimed myself from the ashes of who I'd been. I was 68 years old. I'd lost my daughter to prison, my husband to trauma, years of my life to a lie. But I was still here, still standing, still learning. I wasn't just a survivor. I was Iseult Marwick, and I was just getting started. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories about resilience, justice, and the strength we find in ourselves when everything falls apart. Write in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? What would you have done in Iseult's place? Remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You're stronger than you know.